The fact that in 2019 we're at a level of space travel that would have disappointed all the hopes in 1969 is not due to the lack of engineering or scientific genius. It's actually because of the cost of the way we get to space has remained so high. Let's say every time you drove your car you couldn't drive it again and had to buy a new one to replace it. That would obviously be ridiculously expensive, so of course you wouldn't want to keep buying one knowing that it was only a one-time use. That's exactly what we've been seeing over the past decade, and it isn't until these past years that we've been seeing real progress with reusable rockets with the likes of private companies such as SpaceX and Blue Origin. So let's talk about the risks and rewards of reusable rockets. The first major advantage of our rockets being reusable is obviously the cut down on cost. SpaceX launched the first modern reusable rocket, the Falcon 9, in 2010, and then not too long later, the most powerful spacecraft since Apollo era, the Falcon Heavy rocket in 2018. The fact that this is a fully reusable rocket is actually a huge development in space exploration. With vehicles such as the Space Shuttle have been reusable, their launch vehicles have not, which result in a lot of rocket boosters and main fuel tanks either burning up in the atmosphere or sitting at the bottom of the ocean. Furthermore, since the Falcon Heavy has more reusability, can carry more cargo, and is overall more powerful, it's providing a cost of roughly $1,300 per kilogram of payload, while the Space Shuttle costs around $60,000 per kilogram. Like I said previously, the Falcon Heavy is the most powerful spacecraft since the mid-last century, or to specify, since the Saturn V rocket that's brought men to space on the Apollo missions. Even though the Falcon Heavy has its own clear advantages, the Saturn V is still the reigning champ when it comes to size, weight, and payload. So let's compare it to SpaceX's next rocket release, Starship, to more accurately show how beneficial reusability really is. A Saturn V rocket would cost around $110 million USD, or about $710 million today. Since the SpaceX is a private company and doesn't share their costs transparently all the time, it's a little hard to estimate the exact cost the Starship will be to make. However, we do know that the estimate cost to develop is around $2 to $10 billion. So if we compare that to the price to develop the Falcon 9, which is about $500 million, the actual cost of the rocket, which is $68 million, we see the ratio being about 1 to 10. So even if the costs make the whole $10 billion to develop, the rocket would still cost only around $1 billion to make. The Saturn V is pretty close to the same price as the Starship, but considering the Starship can be used multiple times, it lowers the capital cost. Let's say the Starship can be used 10 times, it's almost like paying only $10 million for a voyage, as with the Saturn V you're paying for almost $1 billion per voyage. As a result of all the development in rocket science, we're finally able to dramatically reduce the cost and can make more trips into space, where we can set up better communication systems, get more access to off-planet resources, have better ability to control and track our climate, and as well as the solar system would be open for exploration, and maybe we can find other places for us to settle, which leads me to my next point. Scientists estimate that the Earth will only be able to provide for about 9 to 10 billion people, with projections that we might reach these numbers by 2100. Of course, with projections like these, some people might try to find solution to this worrying possibility. Of course, SpaceX's solution is that we should try colonizing Mars. Mars being the closest planet to sharing our atmosphere is not a bad idea, and with terraforming and lots of building, it's definitely a realistic possibility. However, without the use of reusable rockets, there's no way we'd be able to accomplish this, since Mars cities would have to require affordable delivery of significant quantities of cargo, and people would have to use brand new rockets for every trip, which would make this incredibly difficult. With all these amazing rewards that we get from reusable rockets, it's really difficult to find any damning risks.
Paid $500 million to fly. And the reason is because those planes can be used tens of thousands of times, and so all you're really paying for is fuel and is fuel and is fuel and...
Here's the thing, rockets very obviously have to use a lot of fuel every time it launches, and the mass of the payload is, no exaggeration, almost 95% fuel, and the bigger the ship is, the more fuel it'll need. So that's where the question of the environmental impact comes into play. Fuel for the Falcon Heavy is RP1 and liquid oxygen, which creates a lot of carbon dioxide when it's burnt. And since apparently SpaceX's plan is to have a rocket launch every 2 weeks, this amount of carbon dioxide, about 4,000 tons every year, is going to become a big problem. Furthermore, once these missions just become a tourist attraction instead of a way to actually further humanity and for the actual scientific benefit, these environmental costs are definitely not worth it. We already have companies doing this, such as Blue Origin, a company I mentioned earlier, which is owned by Jeff Bezos. Blue Origin is planning on having small reusable rockets that send paying tourists on trips to suborbital space for around $200,000 to $300,000 each. The thing about having rockets be more cost efficient now is that it encourages companies to use them without really considering our environment. And even though big businesses don't really care about how they may be harming the earth, it's still important that we bring these issues to light. Personally, I have a hard time trying to argue that the risks aren't outshined by the rewards. Even though there might be an environmental impact, there's so much of a cost being saved, and it helps with the new possibilities of far space travel, which furthermore, now it's very plausible we may find a sustainable and eco-friendly substitute to the fuel that may possibly come from even a faraway planet. The scientific discoveries and technological advancements that come from being able to launch a piece of metal into the sky over and over again is literally amazing, is something we should definitely pursue. From literally being able to save overpopulation, having the ability to push our technology and satellites to an even further capability than we could ever imagine shows how reusable rockets are a very rewarding step we've made in the pursuit to a better future.